I started asking, am I dead? I had that question, and they acted like they didn't want to answer me. They didn't want to scare me or anything. And I said, is this heaven? And she said, well, she goes, what did you think heaven would be like? And I thought, I don't know. Like it felt so great there. I couldn't even imagine heaven feeling that good. And the only thing I heard of heaven was I said, well, like church, because it's the only thing I could relate to. I said, like, she goes, what do you think it'd be like? I said, like church. And then I remember thinking, but I don't really like church because, I'm a kid. And she said, well, that wouldn't be heaven, would it? So like she was just reading my feelings in my mind and answering the questions. I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. That wouldn't be heaven because that didn't feel good. So to me, it was like better than anything I could have ever even dreamed of.
My guest today is Deborah Christie Love. Deborah had a near death experience in 1967 when she was just 4 years old after having her tonsils removed. This near death experience shaped the rest of her life. Deborah, thank you for being my guest today. I'm so blessed to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And my viewers are interested in near death experiences. If you want to go ahead and start telling us about that.
Sure. And like I said, jump in with any questions along the way. So yeah, I was very young. I went to have my tonsils out, so I knew that was going on. Um, but it was kind of a whole new experience. So I went to a hospital, and I do remember I did have blood work done before the procedure, like a week before. But then we went back, and in the waiting part, I remember my father actually handing me over to the doctor who just came out in the hall and got me, and he took me away. And the scariest part was that he actually said, well, your nose is runny. He took me in this room, and it's kind of cold in there, I felt, but there was other people waiting for us there. And he said, well, your nose is kind of runny. I'll get a hanky. And I remember thinking, my nose isn't runny. Like, what are you talking about? Kind of thing. I'm fine. And then he goes and he gets this like big handkerchief type thing, and he put stuff on it, and then he started putting it over my face and holding it, and I couldn't breathe, and I was kicking and screaming, and he put me down on the table, and then he was pushing even harder, and I really felt at that point he was trying to kill me because I couldn't breathe, and it smelled horrible. So I mean, I'm sure he was using like ether or whatever they put on there. So that's how far back it goes. And yeah, so I remember kicking and screaming and thinking, oh, my parents will be mad when they know you're being mean to me. And then I started seeing flashes of light like fireworks. I saw like red and blue and yellow. And so then I got distracted. I was really watching these fireworks go off because this is cool. And then all of a sudden, I just remember being out, and I was in this bright white tunnel, going through this tunnel, and I could feel the light at the end of the tunnel. It was just so bright and beautiful. And the energy was like pulling me and calling me. And I realized that I had to go there. I wanted to go there more than anything I'd ever wanted in my short life. And I felt like the more I felt I wanted to go there, the faster I actually felt like I was zooming through this tunnel. And so when I got to the light, I just remember feeling the most wonderful love, um, and it was a funny feeling. It was almost like, wow, I knew that this was home, and I knew that this was, it didn't matter who I was or what I'd ever done. I felt completely exposed. If you can, at such a young age, I didn't have the words, but it felt like I was completely exposed. Like this light knew every single thing about me that was ever possible to know. And it was all good. None of it mattered. It was just complete unconditional love. And I knew that no matter who stood here in this light, it didn't matter. No matter what you'd done or who you were or what could possibly think you'd done wrong, it didn't matter. There was this unconditional love that totally accepted you. And this was home. And so it was the greatest feeling in the world. And then I started realizing after I got into the light, it seemed like there were beings around me a little bit. And at one point I started getting flashes of like memory, but it was past life memory for me. It was just one after the other, and it was like a movie going really, really fast in my head. And I couldn't figure it out because I remember thinking at one point, who am I? Because it felt like I'm watching it, but it feels like me. It all feels like me. And so I asked, who am I? And I heard the voice in my head quickly saying, you're all of it. You're all of them. And I was like, okay, well, that made sense because that matched the feeling. And so when that was over, I do remember feeling like the light was part of me, like we were one. It was this connection. And then the beings and angels are, they seem like light beings because I don't remember seeing faces too clearly, but I knew it felt like there were other loving beings around me. And they started kind of talking to me, giving me a bit of a tour at one point. Um, I did hear one of them. It was like telepathical, so I heard them in my head. And the neatest thing about this whole experience was every question that I had, before I could even think the question completely, the answer was already in my head. And it was like a very authoritative voice. It was like a voice, I would say, like the voice of God kind of thing. But it was always there before I could even finish the thought of a question. And, I felt like, so I wasn't remembering my life back here. I wasn't really remembering that I'd ever been there before, even though it felt like home. And these people just were all loving. And one of the first things I mentioned was, there's the difference of here and there was, there's nothing bad here, is there? And they were like, well, oh, you mean negativity? No, that doesn't exist here. And I just remember going, oh, that's so nice. Like that difference was so apparent to me from coming even from a 4-year-old point of view. I could just feel that difference in where I was. And so one of them said, well, I'm not sure, what to do yet. So they went and asked someone else, and they kind of said, well, we're supposed to give you a tour. And so I went and I visited a whole lot of places. I saw a beautiful garden they took me to, and there was a beautiful, like tall sunflower. And as I pushed the sunflower, it started talking to me in my head. And it was like, hi, how are you? We're so happy you're here. And I was like, wow, I was like, these flowers are alive, really alive. And she said, well, everything's alive, everything's energy. You should remember that everything is really energy. But I'm like, yeah, but they're really alive compared to flowers here. And I saw colors that I realized I hadn't seen before too. And I asked about the colors, and they said that your eyes are not, you can only see certain frequencies on Earth, and you see more frequencies there. So they answered the question about the colors that, like, why isn't that color here? Like, that's a nice color. um, so they took me to this garden, and I started asking more questions and feeling more things. And at one point, I even started feeling a little bit like, I'm not feeling quite right. I don't feel like myself, kind of. And she said, well, it's like you are adjusting to this energy quickly from where you were. So it was a little, and she goes, you'll feel fine in a few minutes, which I did. And, there is no time there. There's always just the extended now. So, it didn't last. But yeah, I saw these beings, and they were answering my questions. And at one point I was in a quiet space, kind of like a, I don't know, meditative, quite quiet park-like area. And I started asking, am I dead? I had that question, and they acted like they didn't want to answer me. They didn't want to scare me or anything. And I said, is this heaven? And she said, well, she goes, what did you think heaven would be like? And I thought, I don't know. Like, it felt so great there. I couldn't even imagine heaven feeling that good. And the only thing I heard of heaven was, I said, well, like church, because it's the only thing I could relate to. I said, like, she goes, what would you think it'd be like? I said, like church. And then I remember thinking, but I don't really like church because, I'm a kid. And she said, well, that wouldn't be heaven, would it? So like she was just reading my feelings in my mind and answering the questions. I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. That wouldn't be heaven because that didn't feel good. So to me, it was like better than anything I could have ever even dreamed of. And So yeah, it was funny because I was all coming from such a childlike kind of space. I didn't remember here that much. I didn't remember being there before. And I think it was on purpose to help me choose eventually to come back to Earth.
You said that you felt like you were very exposed to the light, like it knew everything about you, there was nothing
Hmm.
hidden. Did you feel that way also? Did you feel like there was nothing you didn't know, nothing was hidden, you knew everything?
I didn't feel I knew everything, but as I said, everything I inquired about, the answers were right there for me. There was no delay. I couldn't finish the question fast enough in my head, and the answer was already there. So they took me to, I saw a place with a lot of buildings, um, people walking around, other beings, light beings, and they were. It seemed like almost like a campus of a college or something. It seemed like people were busy and they were going about different activities and learning things. I asked a lot of questions. I did ask, about heaven. I asked about the negativity not existing there.
And when you asked the question, you were answered instantly?
Well, they answered some of them, and then other ones that I asked in my head seemed to come really fast to me. So there was even someone that walked by at one point that apparently recognized my energy or something, and they kind of asked the guys like, "What's she doing here?" And I didn't recognize them, and they were like, telling them to distance themselves because they didn't want me to pick up on who they were. Um, so I was in kind of a state of just being, just simply existing and not having a lot of memory. Um, so someone came to me and said was a female, and she came to me and she said that there was someone that really wanted to see me, and she said it'll take what seems like a few minutes. She said it'll seem like a few minutes, but they're going to come to see you, and they're very important. And as she walked away, she kind of said in her head, "Oh, you're so lucky." And I remember thinking, huh, wonder why she said that. And so she walked away. And then in what seemed like a couple minutes, a great big ball of golden light appeared near me. And it kind of grew bigger and bigger. And then this this huge being appeared, and that was Ascended Master Sanat Kumara. Now he appeared like a king to me. He was very, very tall and beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. And I felt like I saw him wearing these beautiful robes. And there was just a small bench there, and he sat on the bench eventually. But, I remember asking him, who are you? I'd never seen anything like this. And he looked like a king. And he said, at first, he said his name was Sanat Kumara. So I was a 4-year-old Canadian girl, and the name Sanat Kumara just was like another language. It was like, what? Sorry, what did you say? And he said his name 3 times very loudly. And what happened was it was like his voice was so powerful, it felt like it shook like an earthquake. It literally felt like it shook all of heaven. He said, I am Sanat Kumara, so loud and so clear, and it literally was like thunder. It was amazing. And he said it 3 times, and I still wasn't really getting it. And he understood that I didn't know what he was talking about. So he said, I'm your father, your heavenly father. And I was like, okay. And then at one point, I remember kind of thinking or asking him, but don't I have another father? Like Earth was kind of seeping in there a little bit. And he said, yes, but for now, he goes, I'm your father here and your heavenly father. And so I kind of got put up on his knee like like a child would be put on someone's knee. And I could look in his eyes, and the eyes were just the most beautiful. They looked like a liquid blue, and he was so beautiful. He had light blonde hair, dark tan skin, like Malibu tan skin, and he was just absolutely beautiful. I remember thinking he was the most beautiful being I'd ever looked at, and his energy was so powerful that I felt totally paralyzed. Like I felt like it was like magnetic energy. I felt totally like I was a magnetic thing that was getting attracted to him, and I couldn't move. I couldn't move a muscle, but I didn't want to. It was such beautiful, strong, loving energy. I remember actually thinking to myself, if I could just stay in this energy for eternity, this would be all I need. This was it. This was enough. And then he started trying to communicate to me. And when he did that, it was like, I don't know if I can pay attention and feel this much love at the same time. It was almost too overwhelming to me. But I tried really hard to listen and focus on what he was saying. And he did give me some messages. He did say, he said that your life won't always be easy, but he said you will be helped along the way.
For my viewers that don't know who Ascended Master Sanat Kamara is, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, at the time, I knew zero. I knew nothing. Did not know who he was at all. That's why the name was so crazy. But later on, when I remembered it, and I actually always remembered what he looked like, you'll never forget that. So I looked up Ascended Masters and I found him instantly. And yes, he is the one that when we say the Our Father prayer, that is who we pray to. That is Sanat Kumara. He is the regent. He is called the regent Lord of the world. And he spent 50,000 years on Earth as a planetary logo for Earth, bringing enough light and holding the threefold flame for the Earth so that it would not perish. And so he spent that time here, and now I believe that it is a different master took over. I believe in the 1950s took over as logo for the Earth. Now he became the regent Lord of the Earth, but he is still the one. And so that has always been my favorite prayer. I've never really, after I grew up, put much faith in going to, total religious Christianity things. But that prayer of the Lord's Prayer always came into my mind, and my favorite lines always were like my mission. It was on earth as it is in heaven. So we are here as bridges to bring earth to heaven and to raise the vibration and make that a reality. So that was always in my favorite prayer, even as a child. So when he said my Heavenly Father, I did understand that it belonged in that prayer.
Where does Sanat Kamara come from?
He comes from Venus. He is related to Jesus, Lord Sananda Kumara. So they are related. And Jesus actually spoke of the morning star and the evening star, which is Venus. So he did mention that a couple of times, but I don't know if that's well documented or well-known knowledge, but I think people that study the masters understand that there are many that come from Venus that have been here over the centuries and thousands of years. And he is one of the oldest known masters out there. That so I believe that even as Jesus said, my Father and I are one, he was speaking of him.
Did you understand at that time? You were just 4 years old, but did you understand the magnitude of that experience?
I didn't. I was just there, and I was enjoying it. And at the time I was there, I certainly didn't think about coming home. I wasn't remembering home until the end, and I had to choose my mother. But no, this was home, and it was like, no, this is where I belong. This just felt like I should always be here. And that was in my mind the entire time until at the very end. So I did see him, and we had that conversation. And at the end of the conversation, he stood up and he said, you might not remember all of this. He said, you will need a trigger. And I remember, I don't know what he's talking about again. And he said, he took a step away and he said, your children will always be looked after. And I'm like, okay, I'm 4, I guess I'm having kids someday. I didn't know what he was talking about again. So then he did walk away. And then my guides were back with me. And at the end of this whole experience, they were with me. And I remember after he left, I was looking down and I was standing on like a golden brick road. I was standing on golden bricks. And I remember looking down and going, this is gold. And I remember touching it, and they go, yeah, you can touch it. And I went down and I was touching it, and I said, this is real gold. And they said, yes, this is solid gold. I was like, okay. That sounded strange, but okay. And then I looked up and I looked in the distance, and about, I would say maybe a quarter mile away, I could see the most beautiful castle in the distance. And it had gold on it, it had pointed turret things on it, and it looked amazing. And my first thought was, oh, that's like home. I need to go. I need to go there. And that's when they were saying, well, you can't really go there. That's only for people who are staying. And I remember going, oh, like, what? What are you saying? And one of them said, well, it's almost time for you to go back now. And I remember thinking, just the word back just went through me. And I almost felt like this feeling like, I don't want to go back. Like, what are you talking about? I'm home. And so they knew that it had to be my choice. This had to be a choice I made. And so they said, well, we'll have to convince her. And they showed me this bubble appeared. It was almost like, I don't know, like a television screen, but it was like a round bubble. And they showed me, and so I was watching this bubble like it was on TV. And they showed me my mother, and she was crying over the hospital bed. And I'm like, I could feel her grief. And I'm like, why is she crying? I'm okay. I'm right here. And they said, well, you are, but they said, if you don't go back, she will have to live the rest of her life without you. And so I felt her grief, and I was like, oh, I have to go back. I can't do that to her. So it was very without a thought to what I was giving up. You know, I still didn't really want to go back, but I felt I had to. I could had to spare her that horrible pain. So, so I made the decision to go back. I did see someone there who knew me from the other side, who was like a soul family person, and she did visit me. She said I got permission to come and say hi to you, and she told me her name.
This was while you were on the other side?
Yeah, her name was Ezra or something like that. And I think she was like a sister to me in some way there, spiritual sister. And she said, I came to tell you that I'm going to Earth soon too for a life, and I will see you there at some point in your life. But she said it won't be till later on. And so we did meet up. I did recognize who she was when we met, not at first, but when we got together, it was like, oh my God, all the memory came back to who she was, this person. And she said, I remember saying, oh, but you're so lucky you get to stay here. She goes, yeah, but I'm coming to Earth. But I'm like, but you get to stay here now. Um, so we did meet up probably when I was around, I'd say 40, 40-ish, 41 or 2 maybe, or no, maybe later, more like 45. Um, so we did meet up in real life, and we did meet each other, and I did recognize who she was, and I think she felt the truth of what I told her, what we talked about, and she could feel that energy as well. So it was very interesting. And yeah, so I was around 45 at that time.
Did you feel like the people that were kind of giving you a tour or walking around with you while you were on the other side were also members of your soul family?
I feel like there were kind of angels, guardian angels, and maybe some guides with me. They all seem to be female. And I know that I do have a female guardian angel, and I do have a female guide as well. I also have a male guide who I don't remember being there so much, but since I got back to Earth, I remember him. He's always been with me. He's like my first guide. Um, so I talk about him a lot in my book as well, because he did come to me very soon after I came back.
Once you were back, how did you feel? Did you remember your near-death experience or did it take time for the memories to unfold?
You know, it's a funny thing because at first, when I first got back, I remember coming back into my body in the hospital bed, just like I saw my mother crying over the hospital bed. I literally woke up and she was crying over the hospital bed. And I remember thinking, so why are you crying? You know, I came back. You know, I'm thinking this. I don't think I could talk because I had a lot of packing in my throat from hemorrhaging from the tonsils being out. And she was upset because they were having trouble stopping the bleeding at that point. They kept putting packing in, I kept bleeding. And so she was upset. And as I woke up, she said to me, I remember her saying, well, um, it's okay, you're going to be okay. And I remember thinking, of course it's going to be okay. I chose to come back. So it's like I had this wonderful trust of knowing the other side was more real than here. And I knew that she said, the doctors all came in and they took my bed, and of course the bed had wheels, and I started bleeding. I started hemorrhaging as she was talking to me. She goes, oh no, you're starting to bleed again. And I remember swallowing and swallowing and feeling it running down my throat. I was starting to choke on it. And she got upset, and the doctors took my bed and they ran down the hall with me to take me back to the operating room and do more packing or whatever they did. And she was saying, well, it's okay, you're going to be okay, don't be afraid. And I remember thinking, afraid of what? Like I couldn't imagine what I would be afraid of. So I remember thinking, well, there's this place and then there's the other place which is way better, so what are you talking about, kind of energy. And I knew that I would be fine because I chose to come back, so I knew that I wasn't going anywhere. I was going to be back. I also do remember thinking, when I woke up again later on, one of the first things I did is I remember lifting up my arm and going, I feel so heavy. I feel so like it's hard to lift my arm. I just felt like this huge weight. Everything was so heavy and dense here. And I had to get used to that again for a day or two, as well. But I didn't remember. I remember in the hospital room, I had my grandparents visit me after a day or so, and they I I was trying to tell them, I was trying to tell my grandmother and my mother, is like, I was in this place, it was really beautiful. And my mom was like, what are you talking about? Like, you were here for 3 days. You had your tonsils out. And then when she said that, that made sense in a way too, because here I was in the hospital. So that kind of made sense. But I was thinking, yeah, but I was in this other place. And she acted afraid, like she didn't really want to hear about it. Now, my grandmother was more like, well, let her talk. I want to hear what she says. I'm interested. And the more I tried to remember the beautiful place, the other place, I felt like it was literally being like pulled out of my memory. So I remember saying I was in the other place. And as soon as I kept thinking about the beauty of it, and it just felt like it was being pulled out. And so I kind of gave up, and they distracted me. It was like, well, grandma's brought you this gift, open this bag up and see what's in here. And so I forgot really about it. And the weird thing was, though, the experience somehow was always in my subconscious. It was always there, close to the surface. As a 4-year-old and growing past that, I questioned everything. I looked around and I often thought, what's wrong with people? What's wrong with everyone? Why do people think this place is okay? Why do they think the way things are okay? Why do they accept this is as good as it is, or as it gets, or what's just wrong with their thinking? So I was always questioning everything, um, and felt like I knew stuff they didn't know half the time. My parents did fight a little bit when I was young, a fair bit when I was young. I remember thinking, how come I know this is so stupid, and why don't you know? Like, you're supposed to be the grown-ups, And I always felt like I was always outside looking in on something that didn't quite feel right to me. Um, but I didn't really remember it. I did remember when I was about 12 visiting my grandmother and my grandfather, and he was an avid reader, and I think he was reading about near-death experiences, and he had a book. And I questioned him about the book, and I said, well, he said, I think you had one when you had your tonsils out. And when he said that, I was like, yeah. I said, I remember trying to tell something about it, but I said, how come I don't remember it? And I asked my grandmother that, who I know now she was very psychic and talked to angels as well. And she said, it would have been too hard for you to grow up here if you remembered it all too soon. She said, you will remember it, but not till you're older. And she was right, because when I was about 38 or 9, I started remembering, okay, it's time to get back to I remember talking to my guide. I remember all those things that happened that I knew about, and I need to get back to who I am. I need to get back to that. I'd been married a long time, raised my children, but it was getting time where they were teenagers and getting older, and it was like, okay, I need to get back to my stuff. It's time for me now. And so I started meditating, and I joined a psychic development group and started remembering with my guide's help. And it's funny, it started at the end of my experience and it slowly went backward to the beginning. And I remembered all of it. And the very last thing to come to me was the part about meeting Sana Kumara. And what happened with that part was I went to the teacher that was teaching the psychic development class. She did a lot of readings, and she knew I had a near-death experience. And at one point she said, I don't know why I'm supposed to say this. She said, but your children will always be looked after. And it was just like I got smacked in the head with a stick. And it was like, oh my God. She goes, who did you meet when you had your near-death experience? And it all just flooded back into me. She goes, was it Jesus? I'm like, no, it wasn't, because I'm remembering this blonde, whitish blonde hair and this tan and this blue eyes. I'm like, no, it wasn't Jesus. But she goes, who was it? I'm like, it was God. Like, I didn't know. And from that point on, I started researching and studying the masters and looking up the pictures, and beyond a shadow of a doubt, it's like, well, there he is. This is his picture. Which, I don't have it handy, I don't think right now, but I did have a picture of him. Which is pretty much how I did see him when I was there. So it's a close likeness, but I mean the light and the glowiness, of course, never makes it into the pictures. But I knew instantly who he was, and when I read the name too, I was like, oh, that's the name I couldn't understand when I was so young. Yeah, but it was really amazing how it all came back, and that was kind of the last piece about remembering everything, was remembering the visitation with him.
Did you bring back any gifts with you?
I didn't know it at the time, but as I came back, I think I had the experience probably put in my contract, or was meant to happen, because it connected me back to who I really was. It connected me completely back with, I came here for a reason. I came here to bring this information of heaven to earth. I came here to never forget it. Even though I didn't consciously remember it, subconsciously we run on our subconscious a lot of the time, and that never left me. And so that's why I questioned everything when I was young, and didn't understand the things people would just accept as, well, this is how we always do it. And I'd be like, but why? This doesn't make sense. um, so it just put me back on, okay, this is the way it should be. And that knowingness never left me, even though it wasn't in a conscious frame of mind. It was more always running in the background. So it did change me. But my guide showed up very shortly after, and we moved into a home that was had some spirits in it. It was a century home even at the time, back in the late 60s. And so we moved from one town to another, back to the town where my grandparents lived and my parents had grown up. And so we moved there and had this old house that was very ancient. Like it had some spirits in it. And I felt my guide had probably came to protect me from whatever was there. And so I had a lot of experiences in that house with feelings and things. And our playroom, we had a toy room that my mom set up, and it was up the stairs in this small room, and all our toy box and things were all in there. And my brother at that time when we moved was about, he might have been 3 and I was 5 when we moved there. And so the toy room was at the top of the stairs to the right in this small, could have been a bedroom, but we used it for the toy room. And every time we were in there, I started feeling energy around me. And it was like someone was talking to me. And it seemed like another kid, another child. And it would be like I would be playing with something, And then I'd be like, well, do this with it, do that with it. And it started to get annoying. It was like, no, I want to do this. And this voice was like, no, like you should do this. And I want you to do that. And I remember feeling like this argument kind of taking place. And I started feeling like frustrated with it because whenever we were in there, it was like this person was there trying to take over what I was doing. And it was annoying. And I didn't realize that my brother, who, like I said, was 3 at the time, I didn't realize he was feeling it too, but he was. And it was funny because the one time I remember my mom saying, well, why don't you ever want to play up in the playroom? Why don't you go up there more? And I was like, but it feels funny up there, Mom. It doesn't feel, it doesn't feel good when we're in there. And she didn't understand it. And my brother started saying the same thing. He started backing me up. And I remember thinking, oh, I didn't know that he felt it too. And so we took her up there and tried to show her, and I don't think she could feel anything. But at one point, I remember walking up the stairs, and at a certain point on the step, at about, I'd say about a third from the top, I felt the energy attached to me and go up to the room with me. And I'm like, didn't you feel that one? Couldn't you feel that? And she kept saying no. But I know I felt it, and I think he felt it. And so I didn't realize what it was. And I did get messages, and I would say things at times. And one time my dad was really late coming home from work, and I was sitting on the couch with my mom watching TV, and she says, you're really cold. You should go up and get a sweater. And I'm like, no, it's okay. And she goes, what do you mean? She goes, go get a sweater. I'm like, oh, I have to go up all those stairs, number one. But then she said, but you're cold. And I said, yeah, but Dad's going to come home and he's been shopping. He bought me a new sweater. So I'll just wait for him to get here. And she's like, what? And she goes, okay, whatever. So she goes, just be cold. And she just let me sit there. And sure enough, he came home and he had another sweater for me. It was like she said, but I didn't realize where I was getting these things, where it was coming from. And then I had the night where this girl who was like a ghost in our house decided that she would like to show herself to me. And I woke up from a deep sleep, and there she was standing there, like she woke me up. And she was very calm and standing there, and I could see her, but I could also kind of see through her. And I remember that scared me because I think I was old enough, I'd heard the word ghost before. So it kind of scared me, and I felt really fearful. And she said, why are you so afraid of me? And I said, how did you get in here? Like, this is my bedroom. Who are you? And she says, I live here. And I remember thinking, no, you don't. You're not one of our family. Like, you aren't one of our family. You don't live here. Like, what are you talking about? She goes, but I just want to talk to you. I just want to be your friend. But I still felt afraid. I didn't understand what was going on. And so I remember bolting out of bed, and I ran down the stairs. And I went and I hid underneath the coffee table in the living room. My mom was behind me. I could hear her coming down the stairs. And she saw me under the table, and she was like, what are you doing? Did you have a bad dream? You must have had a dream. And I'm like, no, I said, the ghost woke me up. She woke me up. And she, my mom was like, I was under the table and I was looking at my mom, and I could see her behind my mom at one point. And I'm like, well, she's right behind you. And so my mom turned, and then she disappeared. She made herself disappear. And I'm like, oh, okay, so she's gone now. So I came out and I went back to bed. She goes, well, you just had a dream. I'm like, no, I didn't have a dream. I said, she woke me up, and it was when I woke up that I saw her. It wasn't when I was asleep. And she didn't seem to understand. So then I realized later that my mom had called my grandmother, and I heard them talking on the phone. I think it was a day or two later, and she was telling her about this ghost I said I'd seen. And my grandmother was saying, well, you ask her these questions. And she goes, oh, she doesn't know. And she goes, well, just ask her. And I remember her, even with the phone in her hand, saying, okay, so was it a boy or a girl? And I said, well, it was a girl. And she said, well, how old is she? I said, I don't know. And so my grandmother said, well, is she older or younger than you? And I said, well, she's older than me. She's older than me. I said, maybe she's 10 or something. I don't know. She's older. And so then my grandmother came to the house a day or two later, and she made my brother and my mom and me go out of the kitchen where she sat on a chair by herself, and she made us all leave the room. And about 15 minutes later, she came in, she put the chair back and she came out and she said to me, she took me aside and she said, well, you know, that person that came to you, she said, she's gone home now. She's back where she belongs. She won't bother you anymore. And at first I wasn't sure that she really was bothering me. And I said, well, where did she go? Where's home? Where did she go to? And she said, well, she's just gone. It's far away, but she won't be bothering you. And I just left it at that. So, but I did realize that she was someone that had been around me and told me different things here and there. I just wasn't seeing her. And it was really seeing her at that age that frightened me. You know, it seemed okay long as I could just hear them and feel them and didn't see them. And when I saw her, it frightened me. But then my guide started coming to me. It was very soon after as well, and I didn't see him either. I think he knew it would scare me to see him, and I know now, like he was a native. I called him Many Feathers. His name was actually Chief Many Tail Feathers, and he was from Montana in the 1800s, and I was part of his tribe, Blackfoot tribe, in that time, and he was there with me, and I think at one point we got together in my later years, kind of as partners, and so he was my guide from the time I was young. And I was in the kitchen with my mom one day, soon after the surgery, and I felt him. I could feel the energy. I started hearing his voice. I'm thinking, I didn't know this wasn't normal. I didn't know what was going on, but he did say, look at the counter. He said, see that knife on the counter where your mom is? It's going to fall on the floor in a few minutes or in a few seconds or whatever. So I watched it and it fell on the floor, got knocked on the floor somehow. And I remember thinking, even at that young age, asking him, I could feel where he was and going, am I supposed to know that before it happens? Like it felt weird even to me to be told, well, that's going to happen, and it happened later. And he said, well, I'm glad you asked that, because I said, is everything you say going to be true? And he said, I'm glad you asked that. I'm so happy you asked me that. He said, everything I tell you will be true, be the truth to the best of my ability, he said. And I remember asking him, are you from heaven? And he said, are you from God? I said, and he said, yes. I'm really happy that you asked me that question. So he was glad that I wouldn't just probably talk to anybody, although I don't know that I wouldn't have at that age. So he started always telling me things and was there for me. And I started at sometimes telling my mother different things. And she got to the point where I think it upset her, because there was a day she told me that, you're going to have another brother or sister. And so she was telling me she was pregnant. And again, I'm 5.5 years old. And I remember feeling him there with me, my guide, and he was giving me this energy and these feelings. And I said, but Mom, I said, I don't think there's going to be a baby. I don't feel it. I don't feel it's going to happen. And she was getting angry and upset. And she was like, well, what are you talking about? I went to the doctors already. And he said, she goes, I know you can't see it yet, but eventually I'll get bigger and you'll be able to feel the baby and stuff. And I said, but I don't feel like there's going to be a baby. She goes, why don't you believe me? I said, well, I believe you. I believe that's what happened. You went to the doctor. I believe that. I believe you, but I don't believe there's going to be a baby. And so she got upset with that. And I remember when she got upset, I remember thinking, well, maybe I'm wrong. And I thought, I'll close my eyes and I'll ask him and get a clearer answer. And so I closed my eyes and I felt into it more. And he said to me, no, not anytime soon. So I told her those words and she got really upset. She said, who are you talking to? because I said, "Oh, let me check." She didn't know what I'm talking about. So let me check. Let me tune in and check this. So I did that, and she said, "Who are you talking to? What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm just checking." And he said, "Not anytime soon." And then she freaked out. She said, "Who said anytime soon?" And I just remember going, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. Just. And so it was a couple of weeks later that she ended up having a miscarriage. And I didn't know. I was so young. I didn't really know what she was talking about. But my grandmother um, came over and she took me and my brother back to her place for a few days. And she said to me, she said, "You know what? There won't be another brother or sister for a while for you." And I remember looking at her and I said, "Well, I know. I already told her that." And then she looked at me and she asked me the most unimaginable question again. She said, "Yes, but how did you know? Who told you?" And I had no words. I just had no words. I did not understand what she was asking or why I knew or who had told me. I didn't know. I didn't see anybody. I just remember knowing. And it really didn't make sense to me. But so as time went on, I learned in that couple years after that people didn't want me to say things that were going to happen, even if I knew it. Sometimes I didn't. I stopped saying it because people didn't understand. Um, I do remember her having a conversation with my grandmother about it, and she was saying, "What should we do? I don't want people to bother her. I don't want to make this known." And my grandmother was saying, "Well, it's really up to you what you want to do." And basically, she kind of wanted it to go away. And I was upset with that. And it never really went away, but I stopped telling things. I stopped telling her stuff. I stopped, um, yeah, I mean, I told her a few things. One day when she was upset about losing that baby, I felt so bad for her. I remember asking my God, "So, will she ever have another baby?" And he told me, he said that in about 8 years, when your brother's 10, she will have another baby. And I told her this. I thought I was helping her. I thought I was making her feel better. And she said to me, she goes, "Well, I'll be so old by then. That's crazy." She didn't believe me at all. She goes, that's such a long time. Why would I wait that? And that's just the way it happened. And that's what happened was, 8 years later when my brother was 10, she did have another sister for me. And yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of the things I was told were so far in the future that by the time they actually happened, people forgot I'd ever said anything about it, you know, but I didn't. I knew. I was like, yeah, I knew.
You did receive some remarkable gifts. You made a connection with your guide and you were able to see spirits of people who have passed on.
I didn't, I still don't see them very clearly, but I usually feel when they're around. And sometimes I get kind of not audio, but I get words. But often it's mostly feelings around them.
You consider yourself a psychic medium. Do you do readings for others or do you have services that you're able to offer to others?
I do. I do readings a fair bit. And, with spirit, it's always whatever happens, happens. There's never any guarantees. Whoever comes by, and I tell them who I feel it is. And I've even had people where, I say, "I think this is your father coming through. He wants to say hello and let you know he's around you." And I've had people where they even have had such a bad relationship, they'll say, "Oh, I don't even want to talk to him. I don't want to message from him." I was like, "Okay, we'll let that go for now." Um, so yeah, I just try to give whatever I can to help people heal things, and unfortunately the sad thing is I see that there's a lot of bad relationships, and often those are the people that do come through after someone's passed because they really want to make things better. They really want to try and heal things because I tell them, when people go back to spirit, they can now come and visit you and they can read your heart. they can see their mistakes. They can read your heart. They know where you were coming from all this time, and they know you on a whole different level than they knew you when they were here, because they were 3D and now they're not 3D. So now they can relate to you on your own level, where you were coming from, and they can read your heart. So they really want to make amends and want to heal things that happened in the past.
Well, that's beautiful to know that it's not too late just because someone's passed.
It's not. It's not. In fact, I've talked to other people that talk to spirit, and they realize too that, they have better relationships with some of their relatives than they ever had when they were here, because there was just too many misunderstandings and things going on in 3D when they were here.
If my viewers wanted to reach out to you for your services or to ask questions about your experiences, how would they reach you?
They can reach me at mysticmuseonline.com. That is our business website. And yeah, so we also have another website. Well, it's the same website. It's kind of an alias of the website. It's called Verde Holistic. We live in the Verde Valley, so it's called verdeholistic.org. So that also goes to the same website. So we have our little shop with crystals and books and different things in it, as well as our services. I do Reiki classes. I do past life regression as a hypnotist, certified hypnotist. So I do the regression work, which is really wonderful. I love it. There's no two people that have a regression they're all different. Same with the readings, they're all different. I love doing readings. We do all the festivals around here in Camp Verde, Arizona, and we do the Corn Fest and the Pecan festivals coming up here. And I do discount readings at all the festivals I do. So I enjoy that. Often having, over a couple of days, I might do 7, 8 readings or something like that. So it's all good.
Do your services like the Reiki and the readings, do they work from a distance?
The readings definitely work from a distance. I have done a few regressions that way as well. It's becoming more popular. At first, I wasn't comfortable with it because I'm still a very one-on-one person. Even with my readings, I love one-on-one, but I realize they do work just as well over the phone. I've done many phone readings too, which gives me a wider base. I am from Canada, so I do have a lot of people I do still do readings for there. So the phone is good, and video is nice too.
And do you have any last words of wisdom for my viewers?
Just to know that, life is really what we make it. And people have so many different, one of the questions often on the near death sites that I belong to on Facebook is, why are they all different? And it's because we're all different. We are all unique, and we all have our own beliefs and things that we picked up from a young age. I was so young that I really didn't have much of that yet because I was still very young. But sometimes people have negative beliefs, and they do have these experiences that are not pleasant. And the thing is, with our free will, is we're allowed to have whatever experience that we believe or give focus or belief to. And we have to be careful about what we decide to believe, especially when we become adults. What was I fed as a belief when I was a child, and does that work for me still? And shouldn't I maybe update that and pick something more positive? And we have to break down the things that make more sense to us, because we do get to experience what we believe. And so the experience of having a negative experience is as real for the person that has it as the positive one. Although I believe that I have read and researched, and I know from my own experience that really only love is real. And people even that have a negative experience or a hellish experience, at some point they will pull themselves out of it. They will question things enough to say, is what I'm being told the truth? I remember there's always part of us, because we come from the light. We are the light. So that can never be completely eradicated in us. And that memory will always, that light, as dim as it might get at points, it never extinguishes. And our existence goes on eternally. So there's always that part that remembers the light. And when things get bad enough, we will go back to that core light of within us, and we will remember there is something better. There is love. There is love. There is something better. And when we remember that, we are brought right back to that light where we remember this is home and this is all there is. This is my book, There is Love, My Near Death Experience and Beyond. And that's available on Amazon and in my shop, as well as my deck of cards, which I created and has all my art, 20 years worth of art. This is the back. I don't know if you can see that. That's the back. That's the back of the card. And this is my cover card with my picture and stuff on it. But each card is kind of its own color. There's 20 years worth of art and my own guided messages on all these cards. So they're also available on Amazon as well as our shop here in Camp Verde. And I also have a CD that I wrote. And this is my own songs and music. And there's 8 songs on here, and they were all channeled to me by spirit. So they're kind of spiritual folk type songs, and the messages are they're all very good messages, and they're all about love, etc.
You are so multi-talented. So on your cards, you did all that art as well.
I did, yeah. So I just like to stay creative, and I love to help people, and I like to bring the messages of comfort to people. And there's still disbelievers out there, and I try to ignore them, but I feel like they are getting fewer and fewer, and we are opening up, and the energy is shifting a lot on Earth right now. And so I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the next few years for sure.
I'm right there with you. I feel it and I see it and I know it too. So, and thank you. You're a big part of that by sharing all of your gifts with the world, including your experience. I believe that near-death experiences are great gifts because they give us a peek to the other side that we wouldn't have otherwise. Let us know death is not to be feared. Therefore, live your life the way that you want to live your life. Don't live in fear, which is my message to the world.
Absolutely. As Jesus said, I think it was his words since I was a young girl have always come to mind, and they're always his words. So he always said, "There's nothing to fear but fear itself," and that is the truest thing. I think we all have parts in our lives where we have to choose: am I going to buy into this fear, or am I going to choose love instead? And it's true that it is a slippery slope, because which is why there's nothing to fear but fear itself, because it seems once people start to buy into it, it goes downhill from there. Where when we just know, no, I'm going to live through it, I'm going to choose the higher ground, I'm going to choose love instead, and we will always be so grateful and glad that we've done that, because it will change your life.
I stand behind that statement fully. Thank you so much, Deborah.
You're
It was a
welcome.
pleasure
Thank you.
having you. And
You too.
thank you for sharing all of your amazing gifts with us today and with the world. I appreciate you.
Okay, thank you. Bye now.
Bye.